Hey folks, Nathan here from Star Wars Beyond the Films, the Star Wars Timeline Gold, and the Star Wars Reports Rebels Roundtable, bringing you a look at another Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars item. This is the Force and Destiny Beginner Game. That's right, the third of those Star Wars RPG lines finally arriving. This is the beginner game for that. Packaging-wise, it's another box set, pretty similar to what we got with Edge of the Empire and Age of Rebellion. As with those, of course, there's a little advertising booklet, and we have a set of dice. Same number of dice, same types of dice that we get in basically every other FFG product for Star Wars. So we're talking about the other beginner games and the dice pack. If you've already got those, you don't need these, but it's nice to have an extra set. And hey, if you get a couple beginner games, you don't really need to buy that dice pack, do you? Booklet-wise, we start with the Read This First page. Now this has our basic gist, a sample RPG running scenario, and our opening crawl, exactly like we'd expect based on the other beginner games. In this case, the adventure included is a short one called Mountaintop Rescue, which we'll discuss here in a moment. You then have the adventure book itself, which is working very much like the ones from the other beginner games. I love the way they set this up, where basically as you play, for the first time, of course, there's your information here for the Game Master, the part you're supposed to read out loud, the rules to explain to the players, and then sidebars that can help the players or help the Game Master. I really, really like the way they lay that out to make it so easy for a first-time Game Master, and Game Master who's maybe not taught this game before will really find it easy to teach it to new players. Once you've done this entire scenario, where you're fighting basically against this guy in the end, Malefax, who is a Deveronian Darksider who wants a holocron from this place you wind up. This basically old Jedi temple that's been abandoned and whatnot. You're looking to take him down, and once you have, you finish the adventure and you move on to the last of the books, which is the rulebook. Again, general rules for Force and Destiny, not nearly as deep as you'll get with the core rulebook, but if you go through these in the order that's expected, this, you have a really good sense of it so that when the core game does come around, the core rulebook does come around, you'll be in much better shape to be able to play effectively as a player or as the Game Master, the storyteller. Now, you also have some supplemental materials here. You have character folios for the individual characters used within this adventure. You have Dao, you have Sarenda, Dao in this case being the Mystic, Sarenda the Guardian, Kaveri the Seeker, and then we have Tarast the Sentinel. One thing I think is really kind of cool about these characters, and the ones they give you free online as well, is they're not quite as random as appeared in Edge of the Empire or Age of Rebellion. It sort of felt in those beginner games, and in a lot of RPG scenarios just in general, that they just sort of throw characters together and say, here's your adventure, we don't care how you came together. These all share a common link. Basically, there's a character who is a historian, a scholar, who travels to different locations to learn more about the Force. Is not Force sensitive, but travels to learn more about the Force. And over the years, this woman has encountered Dao, Kaveri, Tarast, and other Force sensitives that she's sort of taken under her wing for a short time to help them learn about the Force before they go off and try to learn how to use the Force themselves. So they all have Force sensitivity, but aren't necessarily heavily versed in using the Force. Sarenda is a unique case here in that she's someone who has been discovered to be Force sensitive. She's been able to repair a broken lightsaber, but she's actually not met this scholar. Her aunt says, hey, this is who should help you go find the scholar. But it turns out that the scholar is captured by that guy Malefax, forced to go to this planet to try to get into this temple and find this old Jedi holocron, and is just barely able to send out a distress call, before doing so. That distress call goes to all these allies and is also discovered by Sarenda, so they all sort of converge on the same place, on the same mission, and decide to work together. It creates this group where their common link isn't just the rebellion, or hey, they're out to make some money. It's to save the life of someone who means something to all of them, even if for the most part they don't know each other. Kaveri and Dao have traveled together, but the others don't really know each other previously, or at least know each other very well. I found that a very cool aspect to the way they set up the story. The story itself, though, unfortunately, pretty basic. They show up on the planet, they go up on a mountaintop, they pass some trials, fight some creatures, fight some locals, fight some mercenaries, and fight Malefax. Just kind of the standard rote expectation of what to do, but it then brings them together and it's acknowledged at the end, hey, you're now a new team, essentially, which is pretty awesome. As you're playing, you may find yourself needing to use different things to keep track of characters. You have your Destiny tokens up here, of course, but then you have your different tokens for individual characters, bad guys, the Advos Sea mercenaries you go up against, the locals, ice wolves, and whatnot here. And of course, if you're going to play with these, you'll play with them by placing them to keep track of their locations on a map. In this case, we have a map of the temple itself, where much of the action takes place, but of course you have to get to the temple. So you also have the ruin, the valley, and, again, the valley stretches here, and the bridge. So several maps to help you keep track of the action. Granted, you don't want to always play with maps simply because you have to create them when you start creating your own scenarios, but it's a good way to get people started on playing the game. In general, I find this to be a pretty solid set. I always love these beginner games just because of the way that they present learning how to play. But in this case, despite the fact that the adventure itself is pretty straightforward, I love the way they bring and tie these characters all together, and that makes it feel like a much more solid beginner adventure than perhaps, for instance, what we got with Edge of the Empire. Age of Rebellion was alright, but Edge of the Empire was a little bit weak relative to this one. So if you're going to be playing Force and Destiny, if this is your first time playing a Star Wars role-playing game for Fantasy Flight Games, definitely check this one out. Though I would note here, there's not a lot, there's some, but not a lot that's really different at all in relation to Age of Rebellion and Edge of the Empire. So if you have played either of those, you might want to wait for the core rulebook, unless you just want this for its adventure, its extra set of dice, and whatnot here. But for a new player, I would definitely recommend the Force and Destiny beginner game.